This right here, this was Mitt Romney's house in Massachusetts. Nice, right? A $3 million estate in a really lovely town just outside of Boston called Belmont, Massachusetts. In April 2009, Mitt Romney sold this estate in Belmont with the pool you can see there and the tennis court. This, I think, is one of Mitt Romney's son's houses. This is just around the corner from the old Mitt Romney estate in the same town in Belmont. After selling his $3 million home in Belmont, Massachusetts, Mitt Romney and his wife, who are multimillionaires, obviously, they say that they moved into a basement apartment in this house, in their son's house. This house, again, just around the corner from their old house that they sold. The basement of the son's house was Mitt Romney's official residence in Massachusetts. That, for example, was the official address he gave for the purposes of voting. Now, the rules of Massachusetts residency when it comes to voting purposes are pretty clear. Your place of residency for voting must be where you dwell. It must be where you live, and it must also be the center of your domestic, social, and civil life. Nice. Was Mitt Romney's son's basement where he dwells? Was it the center of his domestic, social, and civil life? I have no idea. What do I know? What do you know? What does anybody know about Mitt Romney's domestic life and where its center is? Who knows? But that was the claim that Mr. Romney was making when he proclaimed that to be his official address. He told the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that his son's basement was where he dwelled. At the same time, Mr. Romney purported to dwell in his son's basement, though. At the same time, he claimed that his son's basement was the center of his domestic, social, and civil life. Mitt Romney also owned this house in California, a $12.5 million beachfront abode just outside San Diego in the coastal town of La Jolla. The Romneys also owned this $10 million, what they call cabin, up in New Hampshire, scenically located on the shores of beautiful Lake Winnipesaukee. So Mitt Romney has a $12 million house in California. He has a $10 million house in New Hampshire, but come election time, he says he lives in his son's basement in Massachusetts, which would mean that he would be a Massachusetts resident. It would imply that the center of his life is the basement of his son's house. As hard as that may be to believe, and here's where the problem comes in, Mitt Romney went on voting in Massachusetts as if he still lived there. He reportedly voted in the Republican primary for the late Ted Kennedy's Senate seat, a primary won by Republican Scott Brown. And then he mailed in a ballot in the general election race that made Scott Brown a senator from Massachusetts, all apparently while living in his son's basement, even though he had multi-million-dollar homes in both California and New Hampshire at the time. Does that sound feasible? Now that these questions are being raised about Mitt Romney as he runs for president, I frankly expect that his campaign is going to handle this very well. They're going to come up with a very easy-to-remember explanatory story that makes this all go away. I'm guessing that's what they'll do. Mr. Romney has the same campaign spokesman now that he had the last time this sort of controversy swirled around him. That was when he was running for governor of Massachusetts in 2002. The Massachusetts residency requirements for voting are, again, sort of poetic. Your voting address must be where you dwell, and it must be the center of your domestic, social, and civil life. That's for voting. But the residency requirements, if you want to run for governor in Massachusetts, those requirements are different. Those requirements are that you must have lived in the state for 7 consecutive years before running. Mitt Romney ran for governor of Massachusetts in 2002. From 1999 to 2001, he lived in Utah. His house in Park City, Utah was taxed as his primary residence. He lived in Utah. He paid $54,000 less in property taxes than he would have paid had he been a resident someplace else, say Massachusetts, if he was just staying in Utah for a while. I was living in Massachusetts at the time he was running for governor, and I remember that campaign. I remember how angry people were about the idea that this guy from Utah was going to be the next Massachusetts governor. It was a real controversy, at least among Democrats that I heard talking about it. It seemed at the time like it was going to affect his chances of becoming governor. But Mr. Romney's campaign handled it really deftly. They paid all of the difference in taxes that he would have paid had he not been a Utah resident. They blamed Utah. They said it was Utah's mistake. They said Mitt Romney never wanted to move his residency. It must have been some clerical error. It took a long time, a lot of finagling. I'm sure it took a lot of legal fees, but they got that issue settled. They made it seem that legally Mitt Romney had lived in the state where he wanted to be governor, even though it really seemed like he lived in Utah. They settled that back in 2002. And my guess is that they will get it settled in this case as well. in response to a complaint filed about whether or not Mitt Romney voted illegally when he voted in the Scott Brown election last year. Massachusetts state officials are trying already to brush this complaint off. Massachusetts election officials telling the conservative website The Daily Caller today, quote, "This was adjudicated before, in 2002, when he ran for governor." The same Massachusetts official said that although these new allegations relate to changes of residency after 2002, quote, "The time to bring this up was when he voted." When he voted? Once you vote illegally, you're good? Once you get away with it, no big deal? Sort of a lame response from Massachusetts state officials on this so far. But I think it does show the disinclination that people may have, even in Massachusetts, to go after Mitt Romney on issues like this. One man who does not have that disinclination to go after Mitt Romney on an issue like this, or any other for that matter, is the source of this Massachusetts voter fraud complaint that was filed yesterday. His name is Fred Karger. He is not only raising these questions about Mitt Romney, he says he has been investigating this issue about Mitt Romney in person as well. Mr. Karger interviewed residents of Belmont, he says, and he says they told him they have not seen Mr. Romney in years. Mr. Karger says he even asked Mr. Romney's wife about the couple's living arrangements earlier this year. He claims she told him they were living in California. We contacted the Romney campaign tonight to ask them some questions about these allegations. They did not respond to our request for comment. Again, the man who's pursuing all of this is Fred Karger. He technically is running for president, although you may not have heard that about him, recognizing that he is so unknown in the race at this point that he can really only aspire to being called a long shot. Mr. Karger has been running a campaign making fun of his own anonymity, sort of taking it all with good cheer. As you can see here, his official campaign slogan, see on the banner behind him? His official slogan is Fred who? Campaigning for the Republican nomination with no real hope of getting that nomination isn't a very simple thing anymore. There isn't one simple explanation, one single explanation that explains why people do that. Some people do it to sell books. Hello, Thaddeus McCotter. Some people do it to hype their TV show. Hi, Mr. Trump. Some people do it to get a national platform for their more or less quixotic policy beliefs. Hello, Dr. Paul. Some people, I'm convinced, are doing it just for my amusement and to make Seattle sex columnist Dan Savage a very happy man. Here's Dan Savage accepting his Webby Award last night while wearing a very important T-shirt. But Fred Karger's campaign for the Republican presidential nomination, while admittedly not likely to result in him receiving the Republican Party's presidential nomination, although I'm sure he would argue differently, it seems to be designed for a specific and potentially quite important thing in American politics right now.
Even with Romney's already favorable ratings, he's got a rival, and that rival being Fred Karger, who says he plans to run on a platform specifically designed to throw a wrench into Romney's run. Why are you entering the contest with Romney in your sights?
I just don't think Mitt Romney is well suited for the job right now. He's got, a great record of flip-flops. I think we need some new, fresh ideas.
It is Fred Karger waging a gadfly Republican presidential campaign with the stated aim of knocking Mitt Romney out of the race. Fred Karger, who has filed this first shot at Mitt Romney about whether or not Mr. Romney committed voter fraud in Massachusetts in the last elections there. We placed a call to the Massachusetts Elections Division today to see if they intend to follow up at all on these charges. We'll let you know what we find out from them. If proven, this allegation does have stiff penalties, up to 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. Joining us now is Republican Fred Karger, who is the first openly gay candidate for President of the United States. Mr. Karger, thank you for your time today. It's nice to have you here.
Hey, thanks, Rachel. Great to be on your show.
Let me ask you first if I explained your complaint correctly about Mr. Romney and his voting in Massachusetts.
Absolutely, yeah. He clearly moved to California and was trying to, as he said, take temporary residence at his son's house in the basement.
How serious do you think this is as a potential violation? Why are you going out of your way to bring these allegations to light?
I think it really points to Mitt Romney's character. He's changed his position so often from 1994 when he ran against Senator Edward Kennedy to the 2008 primaries. He's just completely flip-flopped on everything, and I think it just goes to his character. And the other side of this is very similar to what you were pointing out in Utah. I questioned his residency. He at one point said that he was living in New Hampshire, and New Hampshire, where I'm right now, is a no income tax state. So I've asked the Department of Revenue also to look into that charge. Where was he paying his taxes from 2009, 2010, Massachusetts or New Hampshire?
Have you heard anything back from Massachusetts state officials from the election division? Do you know if there are any efforts to pursue the voting issue specifically?
I do not know that, Rachel. I just sent these in yesterday. I'm waiting to hear back. I put my contact information, but I put together a whole 10-page complaint replete with a lot of newspaper articles that just shows all his contradictory statements over the last couple years.
What is motivating you here? It sounds like that, from what I know of your campaign, you've been involved in different sides of Republican politics for a very long time, but you've made this decision this year that you are going to run for president. And I don't mean to cast aspersions on your likelihood of actually achieving the nomination, but if you don't get the nomination, what are you hoping to achieve with your candidacy?
Well, I'm making history. I filed in Washington, D.C. at the Federal Election Commission on March 23rd. I marched in there with some reporters in tow, and I filed as the first openly gay candidate in history to run for President of the United States. I want to send a message to younger kids out there who happen to be gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or queer. You can do anything you want to do. You can even run for president. I've received thousands of emails and Facebook messages commending me, thanking me, saying how it's making their lives better. So that's one of my principal reasons. But secondly, I want to make a Republican Party that's much more inclusive, that's not so far right. I want to have the Republican Party I grew up with, Theodore Roosevelt and Dwight Eisenhower, and people who are inclusive and caring. And I want to bring younger people into this party and make it a real force, but reflect the independence of this party and the independence of this country, where most people are moving.
What's the relationship of that latter goal and your stated desire to throw a wrench in the works of the Romney campaign? If you are essentially going to try to make life hard for Mitt Romney as a candidate in the best ways that you can, what's the relationship between that goal and what you just described there about trying to change the Republican Party?
Well, for the last 3 years, as kind of wearing my other hat as a gay activist, I got his faith, the Mormon Church, investigated in the state of California for election fraud there, and they were found guilty. They were prosecuted, fined, found guilty on 13 counts after an 18-month investigation of a complaint that I filed with our Ethics Commission. And so, I'm one of these truth and transparency guys. I've worked in politics for 30 years as a behind-the-scenes consultant. I've stepped up to the plate this time. I'm very concerned about the direction of our country. I'm concerned about, morale here. I want to bring back that American spirit of, optimism and getting along. And so I'm concerned that Mitt Romney is just not a good fit. I think he's yesterday's news. I think we need some new, fresh outsider blood to really take this country forward.
To be clear, though, but what you just said about the Mormon faith, is this sort of revenge against the Mormon Church for having supported Proposition 8 in California, the anti-gay marriage initiative there?
No, not at all. I mean, I have leaned on Governor Romney. I took out a series of newspaper ads all over the country when he was on his book tour last year. We even held a demonstration at the Mormon bookstore in San Diego just a little over a year ago when he was doing a book signing there, asking him, as the most prominent Mormon in the country, to use his influence to get the Mormon Church off of this gay marriage fight that they've been on. Let them go off and, help the hurricane victims and earthquake victims and do the good things that faith does. But, they have led the fight in 31 states to take away marriage from a small group of people. Let's let them do other things. And, I'm just hopeful that he'll use his influence to get the church president and the leadership to just stop the gay bashing they've been doing for actually over 15 years now.
Republican presidential candidate Fred Karger, thank you for your time tonight, sir. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rachel.